Well, first and foremost, howdy, folks. For those of you who don't know me, my name is AJ Jarrett, and I am currently the Director of Cyber Monitoring and Incident Response for DTCC. I've got over 15 years of experience in IT and cybersecurity. I started off as an IT guy. I moved into cybersecurity about 10 years ago and have not looked back. I'm also a first responder. We talked a little bit in earlier sessions about how I use some of that experience to color the way we do incident response on my team. So if you did not have a chance to see those, definitely check those out. That said, for those of you who did not see the first two webinars, that's okay. This can stand on its own, but if you want to watch the other two as well, the idea is that it's a three-part series going over all things digital perimeter and blue team. So very excited to be here again today for our final webinar, and looking forward to some good questions from y'all as well. So, keep those questions ready to go, submit them as we go, and I'm looking forward to a good interactive QA. And they always are good. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about security architecture in general. So tying back to our earlier processes and earlier sessions, the things that we talked about in earlier sessions were how we programmatically build our blue team or cyber defense group with different groups that do security architecture, security monitoring, as well as governance, risk, and compliance. Today is all about architecture. We're going to talk about defense in depth, which is kind of a fundamental concept in security architecture and has been for a long time. We're also going to talk about what is zero trust and how does that work. We're going to talk how we validate all of our security controls. So once we've got an architecture in place, how do we make sure that it's good? And then we're going to talk about emerging technologies at a basic level to talk about how, one, those are changing the way that we approach security architecture and security in general, as well as how we defend against new threats powered by some of these emerging technologies. So looking forward to a good talk today. We're going to have a lot of fun, I think. And like I said, ask me some good questions at the end. We're going to save some time. So diving right in, what is defense in depth? If it would not be copyright struck, I would talk about the fact that security is like an ogre and ogres are like onions, but security has layers. So the idea is defense in depth is an architectural strategy that uses multiple layers of security controls to defend against a threat. So the idea is you shouldn't have a single control that you rely on to stop a threat. You should have several controls. It's redundant and it assumes that in some cases, some of the controls are not going to work. So the idea is there should be multiple avenues of failure where there are still other compensating controls that prevent an attacker from being successful if one fails. The reason being is because security is constantly changing, and you cannot plan for everything. And so you have to have broad security controls that mesh and overlap to help each other. And when we're talking about defense in depth, we really want to talk holistically. So there's a tendency to talk just about the technology controls. Think antivirus, EDR, intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems, stuff like that. That's great, but there's also people and processes. So think about our users, their training. What do they know how to do? Do people report problems? Do people report suspicious behavior? Do they know what to do when they see it? And then are our processes set up in such a way to do something to prevent attackers? Because again, attackers don't just attack our security controls, they attack the entire organization. And oftentimes those other pieces, the people and the processes, are easier to target than our tech controls. So when we talk defense in depth, we're going to talk a lot about security controls from a technical standpoint, but I want you to keep in mind the people and process piece, and we're going to talk about that as well. So what is a security control? You say, okay, AJ, that's great. Security controls, you should layer them. What are they? Well, so for people, think about the people who monitor the environment. So like my team, your SOC, and groups like that, as well as training for all of your users, resources that you provide to your users around and provide to your users as they're learning about threats to the organization. And then think about the subject matter experts that are used to design the architecture, provide the oversight, etc. That's the people pillar. It's often overlooked, but it's very important. Process, so think about policies that restrict risky user behavior. If you work in an organization, typically there's going to be an acceptable use policy that says this is what our employees can do on our computer systems. Also, processes for providing design oversight, so making sure that we're validating our security designs and things like that to make sure that we're not baking in problems. Procedures for monitoring and incident response. Again, do we have procedures in the event that something bad happens so that we stop the bad guys as quickly as possible? And then not listed here also, think processes around critical business processes. So think about people within an organization who maybe have to pay bills, having validation whenever a vendor says, hey, we've changed bank accounts, send any future payments to this new bank account. That's a common tactic for adversaries. Baking in processes to do validation and things like that around those can shut down attacks. And then finally, technology. That's our tools that we use to protect, detect, prevent, and mitigate attacks. And we're going to deep dive that in just a moment. So to put this in perspective, let's talk about defense in depth for an attacker that wants to phish for credentials. All right, so we have multiple layers that are protecting us against that attack to say, okay, the attacker's goal is to get valid credentials and log into our network using a user's valid credentials. And they're going to do it via a phishing message. So the way this works is we have multiple layers. Our first layer is email filtering. That's a tech control that prevents a lot of known phishing. It's not 100% though, so some messages do get through. Attackers are very constantly changing the way they're doing phishing and things like that, so that's never 100% control. So the next layer down, we have an outbound proxy, which prevents users who click on malicious links from getting to malicious websites. So the email got delivered, the user still clicked the link. All right, great. The proxy prevents them from getting to the credential harvesting site. The next layer, multi-factor authentication. So that's preventing our attacker from utilizing the credentials that were stolen. So if the user clicks the link, the outbound proxy doesn't protect us against the link, and the user gets the link and they put in their credentials anyway, great. We have MFA enabled, so even with valid credentials, the attacker can't get on the network. Layer 4, we have a SIM, which has alerting, which identifies when a user clicks a link and goes to a malicious site. So we have a security team that will be notified that a user has given up their credentials or that an attacker is trying to log in with some valid credentials. And then finally, the last layer, our users are trained to identify and report phishing emails. I would almost argue that's layer number 1, but this is kind of your least secure layer in that we do try to keep our users from clicking the link to begin with. So these 5 layers work together to say, okay, if one fails, we have another and another and another. And the idea is you want to add as many layers as practical between the attacker and their objective. So that's defense in depth in general. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about how to build it. So you say, okay, that's great. I maybe understand defense in depth, but programmatically, how do we do this like in a large organization? Well, it's a multi-step process. First, you got to take inventory of your environment. You have to understand, what is it that we are defending? Where are the crown jewels? What are the most important things to this organization? Where are our critical business processes? What absolutely has to stay up, and what do we have to architect around? The next step is to identify our top cyber risks. So this is going to be more of an external exercise rather than looking at our own organization. Let's look at our industry. Let's look at what we get from threat intelligence vendors. Let's look at reports that come out that are open to everyone around what are the attackers doing, how are they targeting. That's a great place to look at things like Verizon's DBIR. IBM puts out a report every year. Mandiant puts out a report every year. Someone in your organization should be reading these reports and saying, okay, what are our top cyber risks based on what's being seen out in the world? From there, once we know what we need to defend and we know what our top risks are, we can start to plan and implement new controls. So you want to take each cyber risk scenario and you want to basically plan out the various controls that we could put in place. Ideally, you don't implement a single control that only blocks one threat. You want to find the controls that do a lot. So a great example is multi-factor authentication. That prevents attackers from getting access, that prevents attackers from maintaining persistence. It stops a bunch of different threat scenarios. Same thing with having alerting and surveillance on your network, your SIM. That's going to see a lot of different things, not just a single type of attack scenario. EDR on endpoints, endpoint detection and response, is another example of a control that applies to a lot of different areas. Once you have planned out your control environment and you've implemented these controls, you need to then validate. So that is testing the controls to make sure that they actually function as designed. Are they actually preventing attacks? It's one thing to say we have EDR deployed to every endpoint in the company, but did you ever go out and have somebody test that to make sure, oh, well, we missed a checkbox in the deployment, so although EDR is on, it doesn't block anything. Okay, well, you're not as safe as you think you are. So you have to do that validation, and then this becomes a continuous process. You have to reassess, take inventory again, identify your top cyber risks again, look at your control environment and make sure that it's actually addressing those risks, and then continue to revalidate. This becomes a continuous process moving forward. So that's defense in depth. Now let's talk about zero trust, which is sort of a cousin of defense in depth. Defense in depth is what we started with as an industry. Zero trust takes that to the next level. That is taking defense in depth and then changing the way we think about it from outside in to all around. So zero trust is an architectural principle that assumes no user device should be inherently trusted. Think of the classic way we secure networks. We put firewalls at the perimeter, and we have all these layered controls specifically where our internal users and devices go to the external, because that's the way that the attackers get into our organization. Zero trust kind of flips that on its head and says, okay, don't trust anything, internal or external, without some form of validation. So some of the principles: continuous verification. It's not enough to just log in at the beginning of the day. You need to continue to be challenged. You need to continuously provide verification. Is that user, is that device the same one who logged in this morning? Are we still sure that we trust it, etc.? Least privilege access. So just because you logged in doesn't mean you have access to everything in the organization. You shouldn't. Again, you should only have access to that which you need to have access to do your job. There's even ways to take that to the next level to say just-in-time access. So just because you logged in doesn't mean you have access to anything. You have to then ask for access to each thing, and a risk decision can be made on whether or not you should be granted that access. Microsegmentation. It's the idea that, instead of having a wide open network where everything can talk to everything, we lock things down and we segment it where your machine can only communicate with the things it needs to communicate with today, meaning you can't reach other places on the network that you have no business getting to. And that goes for every machine and host in the organization. Continuous monitoring, so having constant surveillance and alerting and everything else around this, so that when a user tries to access something they don't have access to, someone is notified of that, and reports are generated, and you can identify potentially malicious activity much sooner. Risk-based access decisions, so that kind of goes into just-in-time access and things like that. So the idea is, hey, this user wants to access a critical resource, something we've identified as a crown jewel. Great. Are they authenticated? Do we trust their device? So think posture checking. Is their computer running our EDR solution? Does it have its firewall turned on? Does it have everything it's supposed to have? Great. Now we'll grant access. Oh, it's got a critical vulnerability running on it. Maybe we don't want to allow that to have access to our crown jewels. You need to remediate that first before you get access. And then the last one, assume breach. So that's kind of the idea behind all of this. Assume at some point a user, a device, a series of users and devices are going to get compromised. Zero trust says, okay, if that happens, we want to minimize the impact. So the idea is, like I said, moving that trust away from the border or moving those security controls away from the border and moving them down to lower in the stack. The idea being, like I said, at some point, a user will get their account compromised. At some point, a device will be hacked. How do we make sure that an attacker is not able to leverage that to then move laterally and do other things? Because attackers their plan is not to target a large company and say, oh, I really want to get into some random user's account. No, that's the entry point. There's an objective, oftentimes monetary, deploy ransomware, steal data, what have you. So what Zero Trust says is, okay, hey, the attacker is going to maybe win some, but that doesn't mean that they're going to get access to everything. This is a big undertaking for most organizations, especially ones that have a lot of legacy. It takes a lot to change, a network design from 20 years ago to go to Zero Trust. There's a lot of moving pieces, and this takes a careful approach. So what we're going to talk about now is developing a Zero Trust strategy. So like defense in depth, we have to do planning to do Zero Trust. You don't just go out and buy a product and poof, you have Zero Trust. You have to, again, take inventory of your environment, find all the key stakeholders within the organization. One group is not going to be able to turn on Zero Trust. There's different groups that own different pieces of that Zero Trust, of those Zero Trust pillars, and you're going to have to get all of them in alignment during the planning process. Again, you're going to have to find your key business processes and figure out how they work. You're going to have to figure out what your top risks are and what do you want to address with your Zero Trust strategy. And only then can you develop some Zero Trust goals. So if you don't take inventory of your environment, if you don't understand what the key business processes you're trying to defend are, if you don't have all the key stakeholders in the room, you can't really build Zero Trust goals. I mean, I guess you could say the goal is to figure out how to do Zero Trust. You could start there, but you're not going to get down to specific granular actions without doing all this homework first. So once you gather that information, you can start building out a roadmap, and you can start figuring out how you want to do Zero Trust as an organization. Like I said, it's a process. Do's and don'ts of Zero Trust. So this is from having seen it implemented in multiple places and being part of that process in multiple places. There's some things to think about. And really this goes to anything that you want to implement from a security control standpoint, but Zero Trust especially. You want to involve your key stakeholders from all the affected teams and all the affected departments early in the process. You really want the people who are going to have to implement this, the people who are going to have to change the way they do business, to be part of the planning so that they understand what's coming. What you don't want to do is develop a Zero Trust strategy where you just have a Zero Trust team and they don't talk to anybody and they develop a strategy and then they just implement it. That's a recipe for disaster. Define the strategy first, then implement your controls. So the don't to that is don't go out and purchase a Zero Trust solution without a defined strategy. If a vendor is saying, we can sell you Zero Trust, great, okay, we need to build our Zero Trust strategy and then we can evaluate which vendors offer solutions to our problems. And that the strategy has to come first, then the tools can come. Use multiple tools and solutions in a defense in depth style approach. The don't to that is don't assume that you can achieve Zero Trust with a single tool or technology. There are salespeople out there who will tell you that yes, my company can be your one-stop shop for all things Zero Trust. There's hundreds of them. I'm not going to read them off, but they're all out there. The fact of the matter is you have to evaluate your use cases. You have to pick the right tool for each one. And you have to implement a defense in depth. You don't really want to be stuck on a single vendor. You don't want to have single points of failure wherever you can control it, or wherever you can avoid it. So again, these are do's and don'ts from my personal experience, having done Zero Trust at a couple of different organizations and witnessed Zero Trust rollouts in a lot of places. These are pitfalls to think about. So that's Zero Trust. Let's talk about validation. Whatever architecture we come up with, based on the needs of the organization, we're going to ultimately have to validate those security controls after they're put in place. So we have to validate them. We don't want to assume that they work. We don't want to just say we implemented it perfectly, and everything's great. That is a terrible, terrible idea. What we really want to do is go in and validate each control as well as how they work together. So we need to do validation both when the control is initially implemented and then continuously afterwards, or at least at some sort of regular interval afterwards. Your validation needs to focus both on ensuring the control works as it was architected, but also that it's effective against threats. So, an example of that might be you have some alerting content in your SIM for a certain type of attack. Great, you can create some network traffic that looks like that makes that content fire, make sure that it fires, make sure that the security team sees that alert and that the alert works. Great, you have validated that the security control works as intended, but the next step to that is including that in something like a adversarial simulation or something like that to say, does it actually work when a threat actor does it? Not just does it work as intended, but does it actually stop the threat actor? You may validate the control, it may fire an alert, but you say, oh, okay, by the time that alert fires, the attacker is so far into their attack that they've already been successful and it doesn't really matter. Okay, well, that's not a very good security control then, is it? Doesn't mean you need to take it out, but it does mean you might need to back up the chain a little bit and implement better security controls earlier in that cyber kill chain. And then the reason we have to reassess is new threats are constantly being identified. Attackers are constantly changing the way that they target us. New vulnerabilities drop every day. So we have to re-examine our control environment on a regular basis. It is not static. Just because a pen test 2 years ago says that this control is great or this architecture works doesn't mean that that's still valid. So very, very important stuff to think about. And then again, you want to use different forms of validation at different times. You don't want to run the same test over and over again. You want to try different things. And again, similar to zero trust, you don't want to trust that your control environment is good. You want to test it. Trust but verify. So let's talk about ways that we do validation. So again, we're thinking we've built an architecture, we've decided what our top risks are, we've built controls around those top risks, we've implemented them, we're ready to go. Now we have some options on how we want to do validation. I want you to imagine, as I'm reading this out, which one of these things do you prefer? And then we'll talk about it when I get done with the slide. So, different types of control validation. There's penetration testing. It's hands-on testing focused on identifying and exploiting weaknesses in systems. This is both application penetration testing and network-based penetration testing. We'll talk more about pen testing next. Control validation testing is hands-on testing focusing on a specific control. So again, think back to our example around the SIM, where a pen test may say, hey, we want to pen test this application or this system, or series of systems. The control validation testing is, hey, we want to test this specific control. Threat modeling is more of a hands-off process for analyzing the security controls based on specific types of threats. So that's saying, hey, okay, in this scenario, let's say we're worried about this specific ransomware group. We've learned about how they operate. These are the things that they do. Okay, let's look at our control environment and determine which of these controls would be valid for that threat. That's threat modeling. It's hands-off. It's more of an academic approach, but it's a good way to determine whether or not our control environment is complete. Then the next part is exercises. There's two types of exercises, functional exercises and tabletop exercises. These are scenario-based activities used to validate our response processes. Tabletops are usually hands-off. This is more speaking about the process in general. Functional exercises are more hands-on. You try to simulate a real scenario. You have people actually carry out the steps that they would carry out in a real incident, and you're testing your processes. And then incident lessons learned. So how do the controls fare during a real event? We want to look, anytime we have an actual security incident, even a near miss, we want to look, how did our environment, our control environment stack up? What can we do better to prevent this from happening next time? So I asked you to think, which of these is best? Again, which of these is best, do you think? It's a trick question. The fact of the matter is, what you want to do is you want to use a variety of these methods. I will say, which of these is worse? Relying on incident lessons learned. If the only way you're making changes to your control environment is when something bad happens, and then you're retroactively going back and saying, how do we fix it for next time? That's my least favorite way of improving the control environment. But really, each of these have pros and cons. The more hands-on testing, especially penetration testing, is great, but typically your resources for doing that are limited. So you can't pen test everything all the time constantly, no matter what the automated pen test vendors tell you. So you have to do a mix of penetration testing, control validation testing, threat modeling, functional exercises, tabletop exercises. You want to use a variety of them where you're using your resources correctly, you're using your resources as smartly as possible, and you're doing multiple ways to validate every set of controls in your environment. Different types of pen testing. This is not a talk about pen testing, but application pen testing focuses on finding weaknesses in our applications. Network pen testing focuses on finding weaknesses on the network. So there could be weaknesses in applications, but those are applications hosted on the network. Physical pen testing focuses on our physical security. Think about breaking into the building. Are there dead spots in our cameras? Can I clone a badge and get into the organization or get into the building? Things like that. Social engineering focuses on testing the human element. So think calling up your call center and pretending to be a user and seeing if you can get somebody's password reset or get them to disclose information they shouldn't to me. Also, think about somebody showing up and trying to tailgate their way through a door. Oh, hey, I have this heavy box. Could you hold the door for me? Those are examples of social engineering, and a little bit of physical pen testing too. Then adversary simulation. So where some pen tests may be focused on a specific subset of controls. Hey, we want to pen test this application, or we want to pen test this control environment, or what have you. And adversary simulation says, how do we mimic the tactics and techniques of a real attacker, and look at our defenses holistically? So instead of being focused on a specific system, we want to emulate an attacker. What would an attacker do? How would they chain their stuff together? Each of these types of pen tests take different types of resources. Adversary simulation, very difficult, very resource intensive, takes a lot of planning. Whereas, some application pen testing, you can crank those out very quickly. Again, you should use multiple types of pen testing to validate your control environment. You should not rely on a single type. You should rotate what kind of pen testing you're doing on a regular basis. Do's and don'ts of control validation testing. Combine multiple methods. Don't rely on the same methodology over and over. Again, security is not static. The adversaries are not static. So we have to layer different methods and test things from different perspectives. Also, it's a good idea to rotate who's testing what controls, because different testers may find different things depending on their own experiences. Conduct continuous testing and revalidation, especially of your critical controls. It may not be practical to pen test everything all the time or to test everything all the time, and that's fine, but you should at least identify which ones are absolutely critical and test those as often as possible. Don't assume that your past test results are still valid. By the time the pen test report is written, or the test report is written, the result might not be valid. Unfortunately, the ultimate validation is when an attacker actually targets you. They will find what will work, unfortunately, and that's where, again, we want to test as much as we can ahead of time. Share findings with teams responsible for both your remediation and your architecture. So if you run a test and, oh, hey, this control failed, great, I'm gonna go talk to the person who owns that tool and fix it. Okay, great, but also share those results with your architecture teams and everybody else. Don't just fix the specific finding. The finding might be that, hey, there's a flaw in the entire architecture. We need to go back to the drawing board and change the way we approach this problem. And then don't fail to evaluate controls holistically. So don't focus on a single test result and say, I know this control is good. Okay, a great example of that is I know an organization that I did a pen test for. They had a security guard, armed security, actually the armed police, like in the front lobby of their building. All their employees badged in through like turnstiles in front of these armed police. Very standoff gate to get to the building, everything else. No back fence, another building next door, big parking lot, no back fence, not real good camera coverage in the back doors where employees went out and took breaks all the time. The way we got into that company physically, we didn't even touch the front door. We didn't even come in the main gate. We parked at the next business over. We walked through the backyard. We found some people out back taking a smoke. We came in with heavy boxes, said, hey, we're delivering this to so-and-so. We used the name of a person we found on LinkedIn. They let us in. So just because you control validated that front gate doesn't mean that there aren't problems elsewhere. So you want to evaluate your controls holistically. You want to look at people, process, and technology, not just a single control. So emerging technologies, we're moving fast. The emerging technologies that we're going to talk about today, machine learning and AI. So what is the difference between machine learning versus generative AI versus agentic AI? Machine learning allows systems to autonomously learn and improve using training data. So this allows things to iterate by feeding it training data. It can then improve its algorithms, change its algorithms over time. Generative AI creates new content based on those patterns and training data from machine learning. So generative AI takes machine learning to the next level and says, okay, hey, as we're changing the algorithms, let's produce different results with them. Agentic AI is an AI system that can make decisions and perform tasks without human interaction. Think of an agent. That's what agentic means, agent AI. So think of it like a human. You can give it tasks and it will run specific tasks, whatever that agent is allowed to do. And then the final piece we're going to talk about is quantum computing. So I'm not going to teach you about the complex quantum state that is used for computing, but just know that it can solve much more difficult math problems than conventional computers can, and it can do it much faster. So these are the emerging technologies to watch that have major security implementations. This is not an exhaustive list, but again, we're strapped for time, so we can only talk about some of it. What we want to understand first and foremost is how do we secure against some of these threats? So post-quantum cryptography is a great example. Quantum computing can solve complex math problems. The reason that that's a problem is that encryption is a complex math problem. So what quantum computing is threatening is it's saying, hey, existing cryptography can easily be broken by a quantum computer. So we're developing post-quantum cryptography, so crypto systems that can withstand quantum attacks and remain encrypted. That's really, really important right now because there's a lot of harvest now, decrypt later going on where attackers are getting encrypted data and they're not worrying about decrypting it right now. But in 5, 10, 15 years, when quantum computing is more available and is not just highly paid scientists that are funded by nation states or Google that have quantum computers, when access to quantum computing is democratized for everyone, these attackers can go back and decrypt that data. So there's a lot of talk around now. We don't have quantum computers in place, but we need to implement post-quantum cryptography now before we have quantum computers in place. Another way to secure for AI model firewalls. So we have new systems for securing AI models and the training data pipelines for those AI models so that attackers cannot abuse the AI models. So think prompt injection, but also think training data, getting into the training data pipeline and teaching the AI models bad things. Some of what we're finding is that users are asking AI models for like links to things. Hey, where's the link to log into my HR system? Oh, here you go. What the attacker will do is poison the training pipeline to say, hey, instead of the link being this, it's actually this bad website. Send that to the users. So, it's not just getting the AI to disclose things it shouldn't through prompt injection. It's also getting the AI to intentionally give the user bad information by poisoning the training data. And then AI detection tools. So detecting AI generated content, think deepfakes, think AI generated documentation, AI generated code, stuff like that. We have to be able to tell when a human made it versus an AI. Big challenge. This is, again, by no means an exhaustive list. So how do we integrate all this into security architecture? This is my last point, and then we're going to go to the Q&A. Really what we want to look at is outcomes. What problem are we trying to solve? Don't just implement a new technology because it's cool and it's exciting and there's a lot of hype around it. Figure out what problems it's good at solving. For example, on security, from where I sit, AI is really good at doing repetitive tasks that take up analysts' time. So think looking at phishing emails, think digging through DLP, data loss prevention alerts, things that are low value but high frequency, and digging through large subsets of data. Now, what AI is not really good at doing is understanding the nuances when something major happens. So, understanding a really, really complicated problem and then making a decision, AI is not there yet. So I don't allow our AI-based agents to make decisions that might take down production. So certain blocking and stuff like that, a human has to validate, yes, I agree with the AI. At the same time, phishing emails, yeah, AI that all day long. I don't care if the AI responds directly to the user who reported a phishing email and says, yep, this is fake, or yes, this is phishing, or no, it's not. The other thing we have to understand when we're picking AI or picking any emerging technology and integrating it is, what are the risks? So for AI, one of the big risks is false positives, false negatives. If you're having it make decisions about whether something's malicious or not. Another problem is hallucination. So if you're asking it to provide information, you have to make sure that that information is valid and is accurate and complete. There's a number of other risks to AI that you have to keep in mind as you're deciding what it can do. So in our case, back to my example, using it for phishing, if it gets it wrong on a phishing email, that's not the end of the world. So the risk of it being incorrect, providing especially a false positive, yes, this is phishing, when no, it wasn't, that's not a huge deal. But if it's, hey, shut down this critical production system because we found a process running on it that shows that an attacker has leveraged it, yeah, that's false positive in that situation suddenly causes a major outage. Now, I've got customers and regulators that are mad. Yeah. As a result of those risks, we've decided where we put AI in and where we don't, where we allow humans. And that allows us to design guardrails. How do we keep the AI or how do we keep the emerging technology into, the use cases we want without putting it into the use cases we don't want? What can we put around it to mitigate the risks that we see? Part of it is, where are we using it? Part of it is also, what information does it have access to? Things like that. This all goes into the risk appetite of the organization. Going back to that outcome, does the business outcome outweigh the risks with the guardrails that we can put in place? It's a pretty simple math problem, really, at the end of the day. For each AI use case, you got to say, does the outcome outweigh the risks with the guardrails we put in place? Are the costs of the guardrails too prohibitive? Whatever. If we're okay with the risks and we're okay with the costs, then we should do it. If not, we should wait and see what else is available. So I'm expecting, since we talked about AI, especially at the end, lots of questions related to AI, but I'm hoping you have some other ones. All right, I'm going to try to not make this take up the remaining 15 minutes in this webinar, but I think there is definitely a balance. I'm seeing a lot of promises from AI security companies around what AI is going to eventually do. So far, those promises have been kind of, I don't want to say empty, but the hype and the reality are very different. I think AI is set to really change the way we do security from a analysis standpoint. Again, in being able to automate away a lot of these repetitive tasks. So, low-level investigations that are not very fruitful, that even when it is a true positive, it's usually not a big impact. That's a great use of AI that frees up analysts' time for higher level thinking. Going through and consuming our policies and procedures or our playbooks to help the analyst during their investigation to make sure that they follow all the steps that they're supposed to follow. Great use of AI. I am not seeing right now AI replacing an analyst. We are not reducing the number of analysts on our team as a result of the AI tools we are implementing. We're just allowing them to do better work with the time that they have. So I don't see the SOC going away. I don't see, those entry-level security analyst jobs going away as a result of AI. What I do see is the nature of the work changing a little bit, and with that comes some challenges. If we automate away a lot of the basic investigative tasks, eventually our talent pipeline might suffer. So I like to say, how do you build a SOC lead? Well, you take a level 3 SOC analyst and you give them additional responsibilities and you teach them how to be, team leads and things like that. How do you build a level 3 SOC analyst? Well, you take a level 2 SOC analyst and you get them training and hands-on experience and build up their knowledge. How do you get a level 2 analyst? Well, you take a level 1 analyst and you give them training and hands-on experience and you build up their knowledge. So if we take away the basic, all of the basic fundamental security things with AI, the problem you get is eventually those SOC leads become managers or retire or move out of the SOC. And if you don't have that pipeline behind them, that critical human is out of the mix. So we have to strike a balance. We want our analysts to be as effective as possible, but we also don't want them to stop engaging their brains because the AI does everything for them. And that balance is very, very difficult to maintain. And I've yet to see what that's going to look like when this stabilizes. Right now, there's a lot of things up in the air, a lot of new things. But again, I don't see security jobs going away as a result of AI. And the big challenge on leaders like me is how do we keep that talent pipeline going? So great question. Oof, when will it fully take over? I have no clue. Um, I've heard multiple scenarios and predictions on when will quantum computing get out of the research phase and into the operational phase in any amount, and I'm hearing anywhere from the next 5 years to the next 15. Um, that's not to say fully take over. Fully take over will likely take a long, long time, especially in larger organizations. Although we larger organizations may have the resources to implement quantum computing sooner than smaller organizations. They also have a lot of tech debt, a lot of systems that are very legacy. Coming from the financial sector, we have a lot of legacy. We have architecture from decades ago still in, and we have systems from decades ago that we still have to support because of our customers. So I mean, I see quantum computing fully taking over. That's going to be decades from now. Now, will people have access to quantum computing much sooner? Yes. I see quantum computing type services. Think, AWS for quantum computers. I see that coming online much sooner, which means that the threat actors are going to have access to quantum computing, which is, concerning, and is something that we have to plan around. These are good questions. Oh man, um, great question. Shift from quantum computing from regular computing to quantum computing, or classic computing to quantum computing. Um, I would say it depends on what you're going into. If you're a computer scientist, you need to learn what qubits are, and you need to learn how that happens at a low level. If you're a programmer, you should expect, the way programming to work to change a little bit as a result, but new languages will be developed, and I think it's just going to be learning the new languages. Now, AI is a little different. I think AI affects everyone, whether you're, computer science, like working at the bit level or not. AI affects everybody. The biggest thing is learn how to use AI tools, especially the productivity tools that are out there. The other thing is don't rely on them entirely. Like if you're a new grad and you just spent the last couple years of your college writing all your essays with ChatGPT, no judgment, but do understand when you get into the workforce, there's going to be some AI. I mean, I've been known to allow AI to help me make my emails sound better and things like that, or enhance my presentations. But you got to know what you're talking about. So if you rely on and too heavily on AI and you don't really understand the concept underneath, eventually the AI is going to have you read something that doesn't make sense and you won't know the difference. That said, you don't want to be a Luddite. You don't want to sit there and not know AI. Oh, I refuse to use AI. No, there's definitely some things that are better, faster, easier as a result of AI, and you should figure out the right ways to use them in your work. Because if you want to get ahead, if you want to continue to advance, you're going to need to stay up to date. So I would say take opportunities to learn how to use AI. um, become your entire thing. I will say if you are wanting to be a programmer, AI is going to wreck your world a little bit. We're seeing a lot of things change where, entry level programming, much like a lot of other entry level tasks, are starting to be automated away with AI, and we're definitely seeing a big shift. That's that's not to say that the expertise is not valuable, but you know, that is the place where I see AI actually causing a reduction in jobs, is especially in programming, just because it's a lot of repetitive tasks that can be automated. So be cognizant of that and look at where you want to develop in terms of what you specialize in, and try to future proof yourself. Don't get pigeonholed into a single technology. Stay open, stay learning, and honestly, the people that go the furthest in this industry are the people who can adapt and change. So, great question. What is new in 2025? I mean, there's definitely some new crypto systems that are being developed. There's also some guidance out there from groups like NIST that is constantly being updated. Really, what's happening in 2025 is a lot of organizations are starting to implement efforts to prepare for post-quantum cryptography. Um, it's been an industry talking point for a while now, um, but we haven't seen a lot of movement in terms of actually replacing cryptographic algorithms and certificates and things like that with post-quantum cryptography. Like now we're starting to see the operationalization of that, as organizations realize that, hey, this is the thing, we have to get a plan together to go for it, and start actually swapping out some of these old crypto systems for new crypto systems. So I don't think anything groundbreaking has happened other than the capabilities of quantum computers continue to iterate and become better and better and better. Um, kind of in line with the expectations of the industry, which is, hey, right now quantum is only for a handful of very, very well resourced organizations, mostly nation states. Um, but we're seeing the capabilities of those quantum computers start to improve dramatically. We have not seen actually quantum breaking modern crypto systems. We have not gotten to that point yet. That's coming very soon. Um, but we're not quite there yet. So great question. Oh man. Okay. Great question. These have all been awesome questions. I really appreciate it. I love talking about things like this. So, um, yeah, best practices around architecture. The big thing I would say is make sure that it's an iterative process. It's not a destination. You're not saying, hey, okay. I mean, maybe you're coming into a brand new startup company and you're getting to architect the security stack from scratch. That's rare. That doesn't happen very much. So a lot of times you're coming into an existing security stack and you're taking over the reins of security architecture. And so you're having to work within what is already there. Um, the best practices are plan well, do good assessments, and iterate. So, you want to prioritize. You don't want to try and boil the ocean. If you come into an organization and the architecture is very old, very problematic, has lots of issues, the first thing you need to do is triage and figure out, okay, which changes do I need to make that are going to be the most impactful? Target those first, and then iterate and keep going and keep going and keep going. It's going to be a journey, not a destination. A good security architecture program is not a one-time project. It's a program that has constant care and feeding, where after you address the major problems, you're reassessing and you're going back and you're hitting more problems because you're going to continue to find issues. If you're working on a complex enough environment, there will always be security issues. And so you have to be constantly assessing, reassessing, iterate. And so you have to build a process that's sustainable. And what I mean by that is, it can't be DEFCON 1, nuclear war all the time. You have to, find a steady pace that your security architecture team can operate at, where you're getting things done, but you're not burning everybody out. And again, that's where triage comes in to say, okay, hey, we have a new problem we need to solve for. Great. What's the criticality of that problem? Oh, that's a low. All right, we're gonna park that over here for now, and we're gonna work on these highs. Similar to the way that you approach security incident response, but over much longer time frames. When it comes to emerging technologies, again, understand what use cases you're trying to solve for and what outcomes you're trying to use the emerging technologies for. Don't just implement emerging technologies for the sake of implementing them. Understand exactly what they can do. And that's where having a good group that focuses on emerging technologies and is kind of separating the hype from the reality for you and providing you with the information, that's where they come in very, very handy. So if you don't have a group that focuses on emerging technologies, I recommend creating one that just says, hey, go learn about these things and tell me what's real and what's hype. Or really don't even tell me about the hype, just tell me what's real. And then we can start identifying use cases where these emerging technologies make sense. Um, but don't just shove them in because they're cool. That's not a good idea from a security standpoint. That usually doesn't work. Also realize that the promises made by the sales team and the reality that is delivered are often very different. So. Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. It is always a pleasure. I love the questions that I get asked by this group because, there are some awesome folks that ask really, really great questions, and it's obvious that there are a lot of passionate people on here. I look forward to the next one that we get to do. And like I said before, feel free, find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to continue these types of conversations. I love talking about this stuff. And I love sharing notes. If there's something that you've learned that I didn't cover, I want to know about it because I'm constantly learning as well. So stay in touch and looking forward to the next one.